Right, and then thanks you all for your attention and for staying through lunch here. And I think you're going to find this information you're going to receive here in a few minutes fascinating. Um, Many of you know last year we worked with Policy Analytics and Dr. DeBoer did a study for us on business personal property tax and what would happen if the General Assembly made changes to the business personal property tax system. What would that do to local units of government's funding and what would it do to the other classes of property? So it was fantastic information. It helped us at the State House. It helped you all become educated on how that was going to work, and also it helped us share that information with legislators. And I get so excited about today, right? This is almost like Christmas. I'm waiting for balloon drop and confetti blow and something like that to get these results until I saw the results, and then I was a little bit less enthusiastic about this information. But it is great information, and again, our AIC board of directors uh, authorized us to make this to work with them on this study, which we feel like is going to help you all explain to your taxpayers what happened, but then also explain it to legislators as well. So I'm going to introduce as soon as I pull up their presentation here. Oh, you got it. Yeah. And I do want to thank Katrina Hall and Farm Bureau. They helped us with the funding of this study as well. So please give them a round of applause. But David Reynolds, who's Vice President of Policy Analytics, I've known for probably 20 years since he worked in the House Ways and Means Committee. And from there, I know he worked in the budget office, OMB. He was the city controller for Indianapolis. He worked in the Senate fiscal office, and then a few years ago went over to Policy Analytics, which is a fantastic organization that has a model that I think is unmatched in the state as far as being able to provide parcel level data and detailed data as to what's happening, and then oftentimes they can do some evaluation of what's going to happen. But the data you're going to see today is actually updated to include budget orders that have been approved by local taxing units and approved by DLGF. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, and then he will introduce Dr. DeBoer.
Good afternoon, David. Thank you very much for having us back again. As David said, my name is David Reynolds, Senior Vice President for Policy Analytics, and we are very pleased to be able to partner again with the IAC and Farm Bureau to bring this proposal forward. As David said, this analysis is going to look at the change in property taxes between pay 2022 and pay 2023. It analyzes the implications of both the increase in the assessed value that has occurred and the individual business decisions that have been made by the individual units through the budgeting process. Policy Analytics is very fortunate to have with us as part of this project Dr. Larry DeBoer, the Emeritus Professor of Agricultural Economics from Purdue University, to join us once again, and he will be presenting the report to you. So thank you very much, Dr. DeBoer.
All right, thank you very much, David, and I'm really pleased to be with you here again. You know, it's as a kind of a property tax aficionado and someone who studied it for a long time. It's nice to have an audience that is intensely interested in what's about to happen. You know, I came to Purdue in 1984, which is 39 years ago, and started studying the property tax in Indiana back then. And I kind of feel like 39 years of training were done for this moment. You know, this moment. David Bodorf wrote a nice article about this being a stress test for our property tax system. And he's right, it is. But there's going to be a lot of stress to go around. When the property tax bills come out next month, you're going to see stress among taxpayers. And stress among taxpayers is going to be communicated, I'm sure, to local government officials. And so I think stress is the order of the day. Let's talk about the economic context here. Where does this come from? Why is this happening? And the answer, spoiler alert, is it is a 2-year delayed effect of COVID, the lockdown, the recession, and the recovery in 2020 and 2021. So let's start out. Home building. All right, let's start out with housing. What's happening to housing? Well, this is home building permits. It's a time series. The numbers there run from about 1990 to the present, and the gray bars that you can just see there mark off the recessions. So the thick gray bar in the middle there is the Great Recession, and that's where you see the building permits crashing. So we had this housing crash in 2007, 8, 9, and 10, and the home building industry in Indiana, and in fact everywhere, never recovered. Never came back to the levels that it had in the 1990s and the double O's. And so throughout this entire decade, a decade of expansion, a decade of low interest rates, nonetheless, housing construction lagged behind. And this restricted the supply of housing in Indiana. Now, we got back up to the level that we had just prior to the Great Recession by the end of that. And then most recently, as you can see, it has fallen back again. So home building at a low rate, restricted supply of homes. Meanwhile, Indiana income, which had been falling from the throughout the double O's and into the mid 20 teens, began to rise. And by 2019 had topped the previous high. And there it is. So it was, this is in real terms. So this is adjusted for inflation. So income began to rise in the second half of that expansion. And people whose incomes are rising are more likely to want to buy homes. And so the demand for housing begins to rise. Meanwhile, again, mortgage rates. Of course, they fell a whole lot right during the COVID recession. But prior to that, they were already at record lows. The Federal Reserve held interest rates low throughout the first half of the expansion. They never did get up to what we consider to be normal rates. And mortgage rates generally have been falling, as you can see, for 20 years and really beyond that. And then here came the COVID recession. The Fed cuts interest rates to practically zero, and mortgage rates are at record lows. And so it was cheap to borrow to buy a home, also increasing the demand for houses. And so what happens when demand goes up and supply is restricted? Prices rise. And this is an Indiana Home Price Index, and the line traces the percentage change in home prices. This is an all transactions index for sales in Indiana. And you can see throughout the 90s and into the double O's, we're bouncing around there between about 3% and 5%. Got up above 5% just a couple of quarters during that period. Then prices actually fell immediately during and after the Great Recession, but began to rise again, starting moving above the zero line there in the middle part of the 20 teens. And then by the end of the 20 teens, right, with an entire decade of restricted home building, rising incomes, and low interest rates, we were up over 5%. And we were excited by that. We said, look at this big increase in home values that we saw in 2018 and 2019 and 2020, above 5%, something not usually happening in Indiana over the last 20 years. Well, then, incomes continued to rise despite the recession because of all the COVID aid packages. The Fed reduces interest rates and mortgage rates go to record lows. And people are locked in, people are working from home, people are demanding more space. And the demand for housing increases again, and prices rise by double digits. In 2021 and into 2022, home prices were rising by more than 10% a year. The increase actually peaked at 19%. Home prices, and I'm sure you know this from your own communities, home prices went way up. Now, if we've got an assessment system that is objective measures of property wealth, that is a system based on the selling prices of homes, one would expect if the assessment system is working that what happens in 2021 will be reflected in assessed values in 2022 for tax bills in 2023. What we're seeing is a result of the big increase in home values as a result of really the long-term decades events, but the most recent events with COVID, the recession, and the COVID recovery. What about farmland? Farmland, an important tax base in many, many, many counties, and farmland values began to rise in 2020 as well. And these numbers here come from a survey that the Department of Agricultural Economics, my old department, takes every year. And it's the annual farmland value survey, goes back many, many decades. And the numbers you see here are 1999 through 2022. And in 2022, the average value per acre in the state of an average productivity acre of land topped $10,000 for the first time. It had been in the $7,000 range for the second half of the 20 teens after dropping in 2014 and 2015. So farmland values are rising, but as you know, we don't base the assessed value of farmland on the selling price of farmland. We have a formula. But the other thing is the elements that go into a formula, and I counted 11 different elements, 11 different measures of objective property wealth that go into the farmland base rate formula. Those are things that also determine the actual selling price of farmland. And the thing that is most variable in that formula are corn prices and soybean prices. And here's what's happened to corn prices. Right, the orange line there through about 2015 to the COVID recession, that's around up and down around $4. And so $4 corn is what we had experienced after the big drop in 2014. $4 corn is what we'd experienced. Soybean prices also rise up and down in about the same way at a different level, but it's not the same way as corn price. And then what happened? And then we had supply disruptions from COVID. And then the war in Ukraine got started. And if you fight a war on top of one of the world's bread baskets, you're going to restrict the production of crops, you're going to restrict the production of commodities, and you're going to restrict the export of commodities. And corn prices shot upward. Now, the base rate formula that we use uses 6 years of data with a 2-year lag. So the data that we are using right now for a farmland assessment for taxes this year is based on 2021, 2020, 19, 18, 17, 16, right? Those 6 years. And so as you roll forward with the calculation of the base rate, we are currently replacing old lower corn prices with new higher corn prices and then averaging those calculations together. So as long as corn prices remain above what they were 6 years ago, the base rate of farmland, the starting point of the value per acre of farmland, the base rate of farmland is going to go up. And here is a historic and projected farmland base rate. It was $1,290 for taxes payable last year. It was $1,500, a 16% increase for taxes payable this year because that was the first year increase. You see it declined for several years. The first year of increase happened because we took the higher corn and soybean prices and replaced lower corn and soybean prices as the formula rolled forward. And the DLGF has already announced that the base rate for next year for taxes payable in 2024, that is 2023 pay 24, is going to be $1,900, which is a 27% increase, a bigger increase even than it is now. So farmland is going up again because commodity prices went up. And why? Because of COVID and war. And then finally, what about building costs? What about business buildings, industrial, commercial buildings? Well, here's an index of construction costs of industrial buildings. And what do you see? Yes, rising throughout the whole period. You see that thin little line right there is the COVID recession. A year after the COVID recession, the cost of building shoots upward. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics that puts this together, the main reason was the increase in the prices of materials. So shortages of the materials required, higher prices of the materials required to build buildings is where this is coming from. And I think it's true that these increased construction costs did get folded into the cost tables used for business buildings. So what's the economic context here? Where did this come from? The COVID pandemic, the recession recovery of 2020 and 2021 created the conditions for these extraordinary changes in assessments and tax bills for this year. Home values accelerated because of restricted supply and rising demand. Corn and soybean prices shot upward because of supply restrictions and war. Business building construction costs went up because of supply problems and shortages of building materials. So that's where this is coming from. So what's going to happen, or what has happened to the assessed value and net assessed value, gross and net assessed value of assessed values for the property tax in Indiana? Here's a map, and the green is greater than 20%. The darker blue is 15 to 20%, and the white is less than zero. That is a decrease. And what you see are increases, and in the most cases, substantial increases in total gross assessed value in 91 of the 92 counties. So gross assessed value going up. Of course, gross assessed value, those are the values that come straight from the assessor. So before any deductions are subtracted, you've got gross assessed value. So these are the assessments that should reflect what's going on with the prices and values of property in your communities. The average increase in gross assessed value, 13.2%. Now, last year, we were up here saying, oh my gosh, assessed value went up 5.6%. And that had been the biggest increase in at least a decade. And we said, well, that's really something, isn't it? Turns out it wasn't really something, was it? 13.2. I suspect we have not had that since the last mass statewide reassessment, probably in 2003. If you're old enough to remember 20 years ago, and the mass reassessments we used to have every 6 to 10 years. This is the biggest increase, certainly, since then. So an enormous increase statewide. Now, Benton County is the only one with a reduction, and that was entirely due to personal property. We'll talk about that here in just a sec. Well, what about assessed value increases, gross assessed value increases by property type? The left there is residential, 16.5% increase in gross assessed value, matching the double-digit increases from 2 years ago of what was going on in home prices. So again, the assessment system appears to be working. It's performing like it should, reflecting the objective measures of property wealth, the actual property values in the system. Apartments, 12.1%, agriculture, 15.9%, commercial, 9.0%, industrial, 14.6%, the average, again, 13.2%. The only thing that didn't increase at an extraordinary rate was personal property, business equipment, at 1.3%. That probably tells us what went on in Benton County. In Benton County, the entire source of the reduction in total assessed value came from personal property, a decline in personal property. Now, I haven't seen the data, but I suspect that's depreciation of wind turbines going on in Benton County. So 1.3%. So everybody's real estate assessments going up, personal property assessments not going up as much. Well, what about net assessed value? Now, let me go back and forth for a minute here on the residential, because this is important. Look at that, 16.5 on gross assessed value for residential, 21.2 on net assessed value. What's going on? You don't notice this when the assessment, the gross assessed value is growing 1 or 2 or 3%. But when it's growing by 16%, you're going to notice that net assessed value goes up a whole lot more. And the reason is the fixed standard deduction, that $45,000, next year $48,000, but $45,000 standard deduction. So you got gross assessed value, it's going up. You got the standard deduction, it's not going up. So the difference is the same, but the base, the net assessed value base, is smaller. So if gross AV goes up, the standard deduction stays the same. The percent change in the net AV is going to be greater. And the bigger the increase in gross assessed value, or the lower the value of the house, the greater the difference will be between gross assessed value and net assessed value. I tried a little experiment with a $75,000 house. A 15% increase in a $75,000 house in gross assessed value will produce a 44% increase in net assessed value because the standard deduction is constant. Well, you notice as well that this, in the way we've cut up this data here, oops, the other way, that works for agriculture too, from 15.9 to 18.1. And that's because this measure of agriculture, this categorization of agriculture, includes the agricultural homesteads. So anything that's got homesteads in it has got the $45,000 deduction, and you're going to see that. If you take a look at, say, commercial property, for gross assessed value, it's 9.0. For net assessed value, it's 9.0. They don't get much in the way of deductions, commercial property. So we've got this thing, and it's really worth keeping in mind because it shows up a couple more times in the results that we see. Net AV going up more than gross AV for homesteads. Here's what happened to homesteads statewide with the map there, and the yellow is greater than 20% increase in homesteads, and the darker, what would you call that color, David? The purple mauve. Okay, so the darker color is 15 to 20%. So those are the places where it went up basically above average. On average, homestead gross assessed value is going up 15.5. The residential category includes smaller rentals as well. So 15.5% homestead going up, and 7 counties saw increases in gross assessed value of more than 20%. So homestead values, of course, going up. So because the application of the standard deduction, homestead net assessed value increased at a faster rate, 21%, than the overall gross assessed value at 15.5, and that's because of the fixed standard deduction. Recent years, assessed value growth has been concentrated in residential, but this year it was across the board. Depreciation of existing business equipment might account for the comparatively small increase in personal property, and that's certainly what happened in Benton County, the only county that saw a decrease in overall gross assessed value. All right, assessed value is increasing. What is happening to our taxing units? What's happening to the counties and the townships and the cities and towns and the school corporations, library districts and special districts? Well, first of all, you need some assumptions. We've got the data, the actual data on assessed values, the actual data on levies, the actual data on tax rates. We don't have the actual data on circuit breaker credits yet. But the model that Policy Analytics has got can chunk through the calculations that go into the circuit breaker, and so I'm confident we're coming up with a pretty good estimate as to what's going to happen with circuit breaker credits as well. Now let's take a look at a very simple model of how our property tax works, what our property tax system is, and imagine what might happen if we run a really big increase in net assessed value through this system. So you see there in the denominator of the unit tax rate calculation, net assessed value divided by 100, as we represent rates in dollars per $100 assessed value. Net assessed value, I imagine, goes way up. What happens to the levy? Well, most of the levy is controlled by the maximum levy, and it can increase. If you're taxing at your maximum, it can increase at the maximum levy growth rate, which this year was 5%. The biggest increase in about 20 years. So a 5% increase in the maximum levy, which controls a very large part of the total levy, divided by an increase in net assessed value, which is an increase in the range of 15%. So if the numerator goes up 5%, the denominator goes up 15%, you can be sure that tax rates are going to come down. And I looked, and in 84% of all the units, more than 4 out of 5 units, the overall tax rate did come down. So tax rates are actually going to go down. Well, we take the unit tax rates and we sum them up, and that becomes the district tax rate, and that gets applied to the individual property owner's net assessed value. The district tax rate times net assessed value equals the tax bill. The tax rate's coming down. The net AV is going up. Who pays more? Who pays less? Well, if the tax rate goes down proportionately less, then your net assessed value goes up. Your tax bill is going to rise. And for owners of real property, that's mostly what's going to happen. Homeowners, landlords with rental housing, commercial buildings, industrial buildings, farmland, that's mostly what's going to happen. Personal property, on the other hand, net AV is only going up a little bit. And the tax rate's coming down. And so it's possible that owners of personal property will see tax bill reductions. And that means that what we're seeing, at least in part, will be a shift in taxes away from personal property owners to real property owners. Now, personal property is almost entirely business equipment. So if you've got a business that has a lot of personal property, quite possible that your tax bill will go up only a little, could even go down. But what about the tax caps? What about the circuit breaker tax caps that we voted into the Constitution in 2010? Wasn't that built to keep taxpayers' tax bills from rising too rapidly? Yes, it was, but not in this case. Right? Because the cap is based on a percentage of the gross assessed value. And the gross assessed value is going way up. So people's caps are going to go way up. What usually happens, and what does happen, when tax rates go down, which they will be going down in most places, when tax rates go down, fewer people are eligible for tax cap credits. Because, if your taxes are a little lower, right, you don't have to be capped. That's not exactly going to happen this year. Probably the dollar amount of circuit breaker credits is going to stay about the same. But nonetheless, the circuit breaker credits as a share of your tax levy will probably go down. And that's another thing that's important to remember. Tax rates go down, the share that you lose, if we can use that word, that you lose to tax cap credits is likely to go down as well. So those are the effects we expect to see. Now let's take a look at what's actually going on. Now here's the percent change in net revenue by unit type. We got counties, townships, municipal, schools, libraries, special districts. County increase 7.8%, townships 12.3%, municipal 8.3%, schools 11.5%, libraries 6.7%, special districts 9.9%, the average change 9.8%. The levy going up on average 9.8%. And I can imagine somebody looking at this and saying, hey, wait a minute, wasn't the MLGQ, wasn't the maximum levy growth quotient 5%? How can the levy go up 9.8% when the maximum levy growth quotient is only 5%? The levy's going up double the rate of the maximum levy growth quotient? How can that be? And I think that's an important question to ask for identifying where this big increase in the levy is coming from. Is the maximum levy growth quotient, is the maximum levy system broken? Or are the levies coming from somewhere else? All right, let's take a look. Here's the net tax revenue that is from MLGQ controlled funds. So we're going to get rid of debt. We're going to get rid of cum funds that are outside the maximum levy. We're going to get rid of the referendum funds that are outside the maximum levy. Just look at the maximum levy, but this is the net revenue, so we're still subtracting circuit breaker credits, estimated circuit breaker credits. And what you see when you move from one to the other, this is what it was, this is what it is. We knock down the counties and the municipals by about 2 percentage points. Counties go down from 7.8 to 5.9. The average change goes down from 9.8 to 6.8. Schools go down from 11.5 to 6.6. So 5 percentage point decline right there. So that's a little lower, which means that those funds that are actually under the maximum levy did show a smaller increase than those than the net tax revenue as a whole. Still, an average of 6.8 when the MLGQ is 5. We still haven't really isolated what's going on. So let's take a look at the funds in dollar terms, those controlled by the MLGQ and those outside the MLGQ. And that's here. All right, and so what you see there, the dark blue at the base of each bar for counties, townships, municipals, schools, libraries, and special districts, that's the MLGQ. And they're going up, the total increase, about 46%. is MLGQ. That is, in other words, a little bit less than half of the 10% increase is MLGQ. And so the dollar figures. The orange there, those are little slivers of orange, that's the cumulative funds. Of course, those tend to be relatively small. The purple and the green at the top is the referendum, referendum and operating referendum funds. And that sort of aqua blue in the middle there, that's debt. That's debt. And 35% of the increase in the total levy this year is an increase in debt service funds. It's coming from debt. Now, let me nail this down in another way as well. This is the certified levy. Right? These bars are the certified levy before the circuit breakers are subtracted. So these are the levies for the MLGQ control. These are the ones that are specifically controlled at 5%. And what do we see? 5.8. Very close to 5. Why 5.8? Well, you know, about 2/3 of all the units out there are taxing at their maximums, which means that about 1/3 are taxing below their maximums, and they've got room to increase their levies a little bit more than 5% if they want to. And given the inflation that's going on, one could imagine that they wanted to. So 5.8 really means that those who are at the maximum levies only increased their levies 5, and those who were below increased maybe 5.5, 5, 6, 7, something like that. In other words, the maximum levy growth quotient is working. And the source of the increase in the levies are those funds that are outside the maximum levy controls. What are those funds? Cumulative debt, referendum operating. Cumulative increase, this is before subtracting the circuit breakers, 16.8% on cumulative, 16.1% on debt, which in dollar terms is the biggest, 15% on referendum debt, and 14.8% on referendum operating. Local governments, when they didn't have to reduce their rates in order to keep the levy under a limit, under that maximum, when you had the opportunity to hold your rates constant and take the money off of the increase in assessed value, apparently many local governments did that. And that's where the big, unusually large increase in the levy is coming from. Total levy increase before circuit breaker credits are subtracted, 8.8%. The last one, the orange bar there, says 9.8%. That's the net levy after circuit breaker credits. Unusually, the net levy after circuit breaker is rising faster than the net levy, or than the levy itself, the certified levy. This is unusual because usually circuit breaker credits are increasing year after year, and the percentage of the levy lost to circuit breakers increases year after year because statewide tax rates tend to edge upward every year. But this time they're edging downward, and that means that circuit breaker credits as a share of your total levy is going to go down, and that means that your net levy after circuit breaker credits will rise faster. And here it is. Here's the percent of the levy lost to the circuit breaker by units. So you got pairs of bars there showing 2022 and 2023, county, township, municipal, school, library, and special districts. And in each case, they're falling by between 1 and 2 percentage points. That's a big decrease. I don't know that we've seen a decrease that big since the beginning of the circuit breaker credits in the way we do them now in 2011. So less revenue as a share of the levy lost to the circuit breaker. And that means that instead of subtracting from the growth, it's not subtracting from the growth, and you're able to take the full amount of the extra levies that you're levying. All right, unit impacts, observations, conclusions. Property tax revenues will not increase as fast as assessed values because tax-based growth results in lower property tax rates. Property tax rates fell in 84% of all units. Somebody's fingers typed the wrong numbers there, so it's 84, not 95. This would be the fingers that did it, so it's my fault on that. Property tax revenue growth is primarily driven, of course, by local decisions made by local taxing units, maximum levy growth quotient limits, and the change in losses to the circuit breaker. So those levy decisions outside of the maximum levy are the source of the great big increases in the levy. Levies for debt service, cume funds, rate controls outside, and they're the ones that increase the growth. Circuit breaker credit should remain unchanged, approximately unchanged in 2023, and because tax rates have declined, and so credits as a share of the levies, which are going up, should decrease, and that will add to net revenue growth. All right, that's what's happening to the units. What about the taxpayers? All right, well, first of all, pointing out, once again, the assessment system seems to be capturing what's really going on out there. Here's the average homestead gross assessed value statewide, starting at $135,000 in 2012, rising only $15,000 altogether by 2018, up to $149,000. But by 2023, we're up to $211,000, another $60,000 increase over just 5 years, which is exactly what was happening in the housing market. Lagged 2 years, right? Or lagged 2. That's right, lagged 2 years. So gross assessed value reflecting what's going on with actual home values. This is the total tax liability change. So this is the average tax bill of everybody, and not to be confused. I've seen some confusion about this in news articles. A lot of people equate the property tax with what gets charged to homeowners. But of course, farmers, business owners, landlords also pay property taxes. So this is the average for all of them, and the tax liability increase more than 12% in 20 counties. Those are the orange counties right there. The dark green is 8 to 12% liability increase altogether, just short of 10%. So again, across the entire state, rather large average increases. But let's take a look. Let's divide it out by property type. And there's the tax liability change by property class. Homeowners, 18.2%. That's the average homeowner increase in tax bills across the state. There's your stress right there. Oh, that's residential. I'm sorry. As David pointed out, this is residential. Homeowners plus smaller rentals are included in there, but 18.2%. Apartments 11.1, agriculture 13.1, and that includes the agricultural homesteads. Commercial 5.7, industrial 9.1, and there's the shift. Personal property -2. Right? Personal property assessments, yes, they're going up, but they're going up so much less than everything else that rates are coming down enough so that is an average decrease in the tax bills of personal. Shift from personal property to owners of real property, and in particular, residential property, 18.2%. Now let's actually divide the residential up into non-homestead residential and homesteads. And the orange bars here are homesteads, and the blue bars are non-homestead residential. And I like this graphic. I think it illustrates two kind of subtle things that are going on out there with these big increases in assessed value. You look at the orange bar on the left, that's gross assessed value. Gross assessed value for homesteads went up 15.47%. Net liability, the tax bills for homesteads, went up 17.4%. So the liability for homesteads went up more than their gross assessed value. That's that net assessed value thing again, right? Gross assessed value goes up, standard deduction stays the same. Net assessed value, the thing that's actually taxed, goes up by a greater percentage. Even though the tax rate comes down, the amount of the tax liability for homesteads goes up. So homestead increase in liabilities greater than the gross assessed value increase because of the standard deduction. But if you take a look at the non-homestead residential change, they don't have the standard deduction. The gross assessed value increase is 21.4. The liability change, 20.1. Just a little bit less than their gross assessed value increase. Now, why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. For some non-homestead residentials that are in the 2% category, their taxes aren't capped, and so their assessed values are going up. Their gross and their net goes up the same because they're not getting any fixed deductions. Net AV goes up, tax rate comes down a little, not 21% by any means, and their tax bills go up. But here's the ironic thing, right? Rental housing is mostly in cities. Most cities have tax rates above $2. most non-homestead residential property is capped. What happens if you're at your cap in this situation? What happens is you get charged 2% of your gross assessed value. The gross assessed value goes up and you pay 2%. So you are going to see the full proportional increase in your assessed value reflected in your tax bill. If you'd been below your cap, your gross assessed value and net assessed value would have increased, but you would have had the advantage of the tax rate decrease, and your tax bill would have gone up less. So people whose taxes are capped in non-homestead residential will see bigger increases in their tax bills than people whose taxes are not capped. Is that the very definition of irony or what? I mean, here we invent this system to limit property taxes, but the people whose property taxes are limited, and of course they are lower than they would have been, but in terms of the increase from one year to the next, they're going to see bigger increases. Now, this is not true for homesteads because the net versus gross standard deduction effect overwhelms anything else that goes on. But for non-homestead residential, at your cap, you're going to see bigger increases than if you're below your cap because there is no standard deduction for those folks. Well, what's the range? Here's the count of homesteads by percentage change in net liability. And so the vertical axis on this is just the number of homesteads, a pure count of the homesteads. The numbers at the top there, which are 5 to 10%, that's 333,000. The 10 to 15% is 329,000. And then we move on and we see that there are 75,000 homes getting a 30 to 35% increase. There are 18,000 homes getting a 50 to 55% increase, and there are 40,000 homes seeing their property taxes more than double. So there's a long tail on this thing, but it still amounts to several 100,000 homes that are going to see extraordinarily large increases in their assessed value. Now, some of those folks will be like me. I had my Form 11 last year, right? So everyone should have been warned that this was coming, right? My Form 11 said, your home value went up 30%. And I said, oh, I'm at my cap. Let me see, 1%. Oh, that's going to be 30%. All right. So I'm in that 30% category. So some of those folks are the folks at their caps, but mostly what you've got here are people with lower valued homes. As I said, you got a lower valued home, $75,000. You work it out. Gross AV goes up 15, net AV goes up 44. So an awful lot of lower income people owning lower valued homes are going to see extraordinarily large percentage increases in their property taxes. Now, the dollar increases, of course, will always be bigger for the more valuable homes with the bigger net assessed values. But the percentage increases for lower valued homes likely to be greater. All right, homestead tax liability county by county. Here's the map. The yellow there is greater than 20%. The darker mauve color is 15 to 20%. Average increase 17.4. Increase more than 20% on average in 24 counties. This is widespread. Now look, even in Benton, right? In Benton, which had the decline in assessed value, that was entirely due to personal property. Their average homestead increase more than 20%. So this is all across the state. This is not just you. This is happening everywhere. Here's the pie chart, and this is useful for showing the shift. Right? What share of the property tax is actually paid by each property type? And the orange right there is residential. So it's homeowners plus smaller rentals, 47% in 2022, 50.3% in 2023. Now, I remember last year we did a 5-year projection and we said, you know, at some point over that 5-year period, residential is going to end up paying more than 50% of the total tax bill. Well, we were right. Just didn't take 5 years, right? 50.3%. So residential property now paying a majority of the property taxes in Indiana. Which went down? Which ones went down? Well, the blue there went down from 16 to 14.1, and that's personal property. Right? Personal property went down. The yellow went down from 7.4 to 7.3. That's industrial. And then the mauve there, the dark mauve, is commercial, down from 17 to 16.5. So a shift from business towards residential, and ag went up a little bit as well. So this is a tax shift. In part, this is a tax shift. In part, this is a big increase in the levy, but in part, it's also a tax shift from one group of taxpayers to another group of taxpayers. Tax liability change. Residential taxpayers see the largest next tax liability increases during the market increases in assessments and the net assessed value effect. Businesses with large amounts of equipment, personal property, will see the smallest tax liability increases and could even see tax bill decreases. Taxpayer above a circuit breaker cap, tax liability will increase proportionately with the gross assessed value, the great irony of our system. Taxpayers not yet at their circuit breaker caps benefit from lower tax rates. And then most non-homestead residential property is capped at 2%, so those tax bills will rise with gross assessed value. All right, that's what's happening now. What's going to happen in the farther future? All right. Well, there are a few things that we know, I think, pretty much for sure. So let me show you what we know for sure. First of all, the MLGQ. All right, this is the graph I've used for many years to show what goes on with the MLGQ. The blue bars there are the growth rates of non-farm personal income in Indiana. And you can see it was 8% in 2021. That's, again, the result of COVID aid. We don't have the data yet for 2022. We've got 3/4 of the data. And so far, it looks like the increase is going to be somewhere between 1% and 2%. As we roll forward with the MLGQ, the new numbers replace the old numbers. But this time, the old number that's going to be replaced is the growth rate from 2016, and it was only 2.5%. So we're taking out the lowest of the older numbers and putting in a number that's likely to be a little bit lower. And what that means is that the MLGQ will probably drop from 5% to maybe 4.8, still among the highest we've seen in the last 20 years. That, in other words, the MLGQ is also likely to be in the neighborhood of 5% next year, according to what's been happening to statewide income, non-farm income, in 2022. What about home values? What's going to happen to home values? Well, this is a table from the revenue forecast, the state revenue forecast, and the S&P Global company that the state hires to do the economic forecasts that are foundational for the revenue forecast. One of the things they give us is a home price index. Now, this is a national home price index, but home prices do tend to rise and fall nationally with trends. 2022, the number they've got, well, let's say 2021, they had 15.7, right? 2021 increase reflected in 2023 tax bills. 2022 increase they had was 13%. Now, 2022 increase should be reflected in tax bills in 2024. Will the assessors increase the assessed values of homes by another double-digit amount here in 2023 for taxes payable in 2024? Remains to be seen, but certainly a case can be made that that's what happened last year. Now, towards the end of the year, home prices stopped rising, maybe even starting to fall. And in 2023 and 2024, S&P says home prices are actually going to fall. They got it down 6.7 in 2023, 1.2 in 2024. So it might be argued, it might turn out to be that 2020 taxes in 2023 and 2024 are a 2-year blip, and that we get back to something more normal in tax year 2025. That doesn't mean that homeowner taxes will drop right back to where they'd been in 2021, but they should stop rising and maybe even fall. And the shift may move in the other direction, away from homeowners to other taxpayers, but only starting in 2025. Next year, perfectly possible, we're going to see what we're seeing this year all over again. We know that's true for absolute certainty with farmland, because the DLGF has already announced the farmland base rate for next year, and it's $1,900, up from $1,500 this year. That's a 27% increase. Now, what happens beyond that? And Katrina isn't here, otherwise I would have heard a gasp. The gasp is, look, USDA, that does a 10-year projection of soybean and corn prices, doesn't think soybean and corn prices are going to fall back down to $4 for another few years, not to the second half of this decade. And if that's the case, then we're going to be replacing old lower 4 and 3.80 type rates in the formula with new $5 and $6 rates in the formula, and the base rate will therefore continue to rise. And this forecast right here has it rising above $2,400 by pay 27 and pay 28 before moderating. And so, even if homeowners stop seeing a shift towards them, farm landowners are going to continue to see a shift towards their property and seeing their tax bills rise. Finally, let's talk a little bit about tax relief. Now, I know you heard about all of the bills that are out there this morning trying to deliver tax relief to homeowners. From what I hear, there's not much sentiment for doing something this year. And thank goodness for that, because if you have to do it this year, that means you send out a second set of tax bills. And I can tell, since I have trouble keeping track of the little slip for my November payment, even I know that would be chaos. That would be just chaos. So maybe we don't have that, which means that a whole lot of people are going to be moving through this year responding to complaints and stress from taxpayers. So what kinds of limits could we put on? And the thing I want to address really is who takes the hit, right? If homeowners pay less, who takes the hit? Well, how about levy limits? For example, I know there's a bill out there that would limit the increase in referendum operating funds to 5%, right? Rather than at the rate of net AV increase, which is what it is now. So what would that be? Well, that would simply reduce the amount of revenue that local governments could collect. So if we put tighter levy limits on any of the funds, who takes the hit? Local governments take the hit. What about deductions? Suppose, and I haven't seen this out there, but suppose you were to, say, index the standard deduction so that it increased from $45,000 by 15%, same rate as the gross AV increase. And that would kind of erase the gross AV, net AV difference if you did that. So if you did that, what would that mean? Well, deductions, of course, are subtracted before the tax rates are calculated. And so the tax rates end up being higher than they would have been. The people who get the deductions, meaning the homeowners, see lower tax bills. Everybody else sees higher tax bills. Who takes the hit? Other property tax payers. That's what deductions do. What about credits? Well, with credits, it's very much it depends, because there's so many different kinds of credits, right? Reducing the circuit breaker homestead credit from 1% to 0.9% is a credit. Tacking on a subtraction at the end of the tax bill, that's a credit, right? So there's all kinds of different credits you could have. The question is, are they funded or are they unfunded? Now, an unfunded credit means homeowners, you don't have to pay your full bill, period. And local governments collect less. Local governments take the hit with an unfunded credit. Now, what about a funded credit? Suppose that the state said, homeowners, you don't have to pay your full bill, and we'll calculate how much local governments lose and deliver you money to keep you whole out of the state budget. And you might laugh and say, would they ever do such a thing? I would remind you, from 1973 to 2008, they did exactly that. However, by 2008, it accounted to about $2 billion in the state budget. And it wouldn't surprise me to learn that legislators have kind of sworn that off. Still, we do have a history of doing that, and it could happen. It could happen. What about credits funded by alternate local taxes? Suppose that the legislature points out that an awful lot of counties still have room for property tax replacement LITs. Local income taxes, or perhaps a new local income tax is created, or perhaps some other tax is created that you could adopt to reduce your property taxes. Now, I can understand local officials saying, so you want me to deliver tax relief by raising taxes? Yeah, maybe not. You could probably take the lit that you got and shift it towards property tax relief, and that could do it. Then in that case, the local government budgets take the hit. But generally, if you raise a local income tax to reduce property taxes, those local income tax payers, they foot the bill, and the property tax payers receive the relief. Of course, the people who own the homes and the people who own the income are usually the same people. So it depends on whether you're income rich, property poor, or property rich, income poor, as to who wins, who loses on that. Nonetheless, the local government doesn't lose any revenue from that. So levy limits, local governments take the hit. Deductions, other property taxpayers take the hit. Unfunded credits, local governments take the hit. Funded credits, the state budget takes the hit. Other taxes like local income tax, other taxpayers in the county take the hit. So lots of choices as to who ends up with less revenue or higher tax bills. Well, that's what's going on out there. And as I said, this is certainly unprecedented in this millennium. And, you know, what I hope is that having this information can help you at least explain to the lines of people out front of the desk in the auditor's office and the treasurer's office asking, politely, I hope, what in the hell is going on? But you can say for sure, hey, it is not us, right? This is a result of COVID, the COVID recession, and the COVID recovery. Now, David's going to tell us here about a new resource that might help. And let me flip the slide here, and he can tell you about that.
Dr. DeBoer just always fascinates me how he can take a topic of property taxes and make it an entertaining conversation. So thank you, Dr. DeBoer. Real briefly, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A, I believe. But all of you should have received a front and back hand one-pager that kind of summarized. If not, are they in the back that you'll be able to hand them out? But also on that one-pager is a QR code, and I believe, yeah, and actually the website. So what we have built, what Policy Analytics has built, is and this is a sample where you can go to the website and you can pull up by county and get a map on the township level to see how your property taxes have changed. And then most of the information that was presented is about a 3-page query that you can look through and you can scroll through. So you can go in, enter your county, and it would then give you the information mapped by township, and then most of the data that was in the report will be on that as well. And then I'm assuming the entire presentation will be on the website. And if David wants, we can also put that onto this.
Again, thanks, and fascinating information. I do want to let everybody know we are recording this. So if you happen to leave here in a few minutes, the camera's right in the back and don't want you to walk right into it. And with that, we'll start with some Q&A. Kimberly Cates.
The scan on the QR code says that it has reached its scan limit. Please contact support to increase the amount of scans.
This is the first time we've done this.
Yeah, so I think I think that with that inquiry, they're working on that, and I'm sure they'll address that.
That's
so.
right. Policy Analytics and Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Both, right?
That's right.
David, I may
Anybody have questions?
I may
Somebody
have
just
bludgeoned another audience into submission here.
sort of
That's,
stunned about the data. I know um, first time I saw it a couple of weeks ago, I was really surprised about the average increase, and that was just based on the assessed value study, right? We thought that homesteads were going to go up about 15% just based on the AV changes. And then when they put in the budget data and saw how much local units of government borrowed to help keep their tax rate up, that number jumped to 18% for residential. So that local action actually increased levies when we thought perhaps the rates would be coming down, but because locals took that action to borrow more money, the rates actually stayed stagnant or maybe even increased a little bit. As Dr. DeBoer said, there were about 15%, I think you said, of levies actually had a rate increase. Was it?
Something like that.
Yep,
That's right.
yep,
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
yep, here's a question.
Question for Dr. DeBoer. If you were the county treasurer and you're standing at the window taking the tax payment with a very, very upset county resident, we could refer them to your 30-minute presentation. Or could you, in a nutshell, give a 1 or 2 sentence response that would simplify this?
The easiest response, I think, David, you'd agree, is it's all the school's fault.
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah.
But you didn't hear that from me, although it's now on tape.
No, yeah.
So sorry,
Yeah,
Denny, I
yeah.
took advantage. Well, the property tax is a tax on the value of property. The value of your property went up. Your taxes went up. Now, I can understand that this is a much harder thing to deal with than the fact that when your income goes up, your income tax goes up because you've got extra income to pay that income tax. And that may not be true with the property tax. But the system that we use is based on property values. So, you know, you can say, well, you're wealthier, you know. But, you know, I don't think, and that is true technically, you know, but I don't think that's really true. If you think about it, if the value of your home went up, yeah, you could sell it for more money, but then you'd have to use that to buy another home that has also gone up in value. So in a sense, the way you could say is there's a price index of owning a home or buying a home. And the price index of buying a home went up just as your wealth went up. And so in real terms, you're no better off. And yet your taxes went up. Unless your taxes went up. No, that's not going to help. I was not. I was riffing on the idea, but property tax is a tax on property wealth. We measure your property wealth and tax accordingly.
For a treasurer, the treasurer could say, "I don't vote on budgets. I don't vote on tax rates. I just collect. I'm just here to collect it." And you could say that 20% of the money you collect stays in the county unit of government. The other 80% goes out to the other units of government. So that's something. That's not going to make people happy, but it is factual data. So yeah. Yeah. Now, one thing, and I think Dr. DeBoer maybe alluded to this. You saw those debt levies increase way above the MLGQ. I would highly anticipate the General Assembly taking some kind of action to put a throttle on that to make sure it's not allowed to increase so dramatically all in one year. Maybe they'll tie it to the MLGQ. Maybe it'll be some other formula of inflation plus 3% or something like that. But I do think we anticipate seeing that type of reform going forward. And again, to date, we haven't seen much support for changing the this year's tax bill, but they're not out of session yet. Tax bills have not hit mailboxes yet, so that's always a possibility. Another thing they may do is put this back on local units of government to say, as Dr. DeBoer alluded to this too, you have income tax capability. You could increase your income tax and somehow pay a credit out, put it back on the locals. But as Dr. DeBoer said, do you win or lose in that scenario on your overall taxes? It just depends on your income versus the type of property you have. But it'll be interesting to see if the General Assembly does anything such as increasing the standard deduction to catch up with inflation, and that would at least push some of that liability back to the other classes of property. That's a possibility as well. But surely there are more questions about this. Yes. Oh, sorry.
One point on what you raised about the scan, and maybe the scan's not working on the document as well, is the actual physical address. So you can still type in, do it the old way like I do. I mean, it wasn't only about 6 months ago I figured out how to do the QR code. So you can actually enter the address and it'll get you there.
But we would encourage you to take this information home, share it with your county officials, but also share it with the other units of government. Because again, this presentation will be on our website, and people will actually be able to see, at least through the chart, globally whose levies went up on a statewide basis. Any other questions, comments, suggestions?
Back there.
Do some of the states have high sales tax and eliminate property tax?
No, I believe every state uses property taxes. There are states without sales taxes. There are states without income taxes. But I believe every state has property tax. Now, some of them will use sales taxes to reduce property taxes, and that's essentially what we've done. Some of them have what we'd call true circuit breakers on their income tax, which says that if your property tax is above a certain percentage of your taxable income, we'll refund it to you. So there are links between the two. But I guess to answer your question, to my knowledge, absolutely every state uses the property tax. Mm-hmm. All right.
And again,
well, I appreciate it being listened to.
And again, the assessor's job is to follow the market, and that's what they've done the last couple of years. And that's just a situation when you have a market-based system. This is unusual, but it did follow the trend of the real estate market.
So, on a county level or a taxing unit level, do you have it broken down into the these increments that you have broken down by the state? Do you have it broken down within each county also?
I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's on this on the
That's
county
on the website.
Yeah.
Should be able to find that on the website.
Yeah.
When you get in, you're able to access it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's there's like 3 more pages beyond just one page of the
Okay.
And again, we'll put this full presentation on our website either this afternoon or first thing this morning, so you have access to these slides. Okay.
So I did step outside for a minute, so I'm hoping I'm not going to ask something that you already covered. How would you say monetary policy and inflation plays along with this, and as we go forward, those concerns with our expenses? What would you recommend as far as, it seems like we're over collecting right now, but as we're dealing with inflation going forward, we might need this money, right?
Well, that's right. And of course, that depends on what happens with inflation, which of course depends on what happens with monetary policy. So we've got inflation. It ran 7 point something or other last year. Second half of the year, if you just look at the 6-month number, it was back down in the 2% range. But a lot of that was the drop in oil prices. Still, the Federal Reserve is raising interest rates. We know it's affecting the housing market. We know that building permits are down. We know that home values have stopped rising and are maybe beginning to fall. There are some other indication elsewhere that maybe the economy is slowing down, though not in the labor market, that's for sure, with the unemployment rate at 3.4. Still, I hold out a lot of hope that we can get a soft landing out of this thing and have the inflation rate back down towards 2 by the end of 2023 without the unemployment rate going up substantially. Now, to do that, the interest rates are going to have to be higher. That should reduce the rise in home values going forward. That'll affect the assessments with a 2-year lag. Of course, everything happens with a 2-year lag, including your budgets. And so, I suppose one defense you can make is saying, hey, maximum levy growth quotient's 5, inflation was 7 and 8. Where are we going to get the money to simply maintain our services? And so that is certainly a problem. But when I look at the numbers, when I look at what's going on, I think the inflation rate's going to come down, and I think we'll probably get away without a really bad recession.
Related to inflation, if you remember, our MLGQ growth at the county, I think, was 5.8%, which argues below inflation. And then our total collection was around 7.8%. Again, maybe right at inflation. So, at least from our perspective, perhaps our levies are growing at inflation or less. And I don't think that's going to be true for some of the other units. All right. Well, thanks, and thank you all again. And we always appreciate working with you all. And I think the dashboard is going to get a lot of hits the next week or so. So thanks for doing that. That's a great resource for us. So thanks.